The sky was no longer blue. It was a thin, violet membrane stretched over a world of glass, a permanent twilight born from the day the Shapers came, and the chime began. They didn't arrive in ships of steel, but as a rain of sentient dust that rooted itself in the planet's core. And from that core, the crystal grew. It devoured cities, drank oceans, and exhaled an atmosphere that flayed the lungs of anyone foolish enough to breathe it. We called it the vitrification. Humanity wasn't wiped out. It was curated, a fascinating specimen to be observed in the terrarium of its own ruined world. My name is Kalen, and I am a ghost. Not the kind that haunts old houses, but the kind that walks through the shimmering, razor-sharp forests of crystal that now passed for Earth's wilderness. I was a geophysicist once, studying the planet's heartbeat. Now I study its death rattle, listening to the whispers in the glass. My home, if you could call it that, was Bastion, a repurposed subterranean particle accelerator buried deep beneath what was once the plains of Montana. We were 300 souls clinging to the last vestiges of old-world technology, powered by a decaying thorium reactor that coughed and sputtered like a dying man. I was Bastion's most necessary evil, the one they sent out into the crystalline hellscape to scavenge parts, to find pockets of untainted water, to map the Shaper's relentless growth. The reactor was failing. Not a slow, gentle decline, but a series of violent, convulsive shudders that sent tremors through our concrete womb. Elias Thorne, our leader, a man whose face was a roadmap of every hope that had been crushed since the vitrification, had made the proclamation 2 nights ago. The primary coolant regulator was fractured beyond repair. Without it, the reactor would go critical in less than a month, turning our sanctuary into a tomb of fused metal and irradiated dust. There was only one hope. A ghost story whispered among the scavengers the Aegis facility. It was a pre-vitrification military bunker, a black site designed to survive the apocalypse we'd so arrogantly designed for ourselves, long before the Shapers brought their own. Legend said it housed a stable, shielded fission core, and a regulator that could be adapted for our thorium pile. The problem was its location, deep within the heart of the Whispering Valley. A place where the crystal didn't just grow, it thought. The Shaper's influence was strongest there, and the air itself was said to carry the chime, a resonant frequency that could shatter a man's mind before the glass tore his body apart. It was a suicide mission, and I was the only one insane enough to take it. My gear was a collection of scars and stories, a patched rebreather mask that hissed with every breath, a kinetic rifle that fired salvaged ball bearings at hypersonic speeds, and a vibro knife capable of carving through the younger crystal growths. My most important tool, however, was a small handheld resonance scanner I'd built myself. It didn't just detect frequencies, it translated them, turning the endless hum of the crystal world into a visual topography of sound. It was the reason I was still alive. The reason I could navigate the glass forests without being impaled by a growth spurt or deafened by a resonance cascade. I said my goodbyes in the quiet, sterile hum of the medical bay, where my sister, Lena, lay in a stasis pod. The vitrification hadn't just changed the world, it had brought a plague, the glass blight. A sickness where microscopic crystal shards invaded the body, slowly turning a person to stone from the inside out. The stasis pod, scavenged on one of my earlier runs, was the only thing keeping it at bay for her. It was also a power hog, one of the primary drains on our failing reactor. Every time I looked at her, floating in that cold, blue light, her face peaceful in a sleep she might never wake from. I knew I didn't have a choice. I wasn't just fighting for Bastion, I was fighting for her next breath. Elias met me at the main airlock, his hand resting on the massive steel wheel. He wasn't a man for speeches. He just handed me a small, lead-lined box. "For the regulator," he said, his voice gravelly. "It'll shield it from the chime on your way back." He paused, his gaze heavy. "The valley is different. Kalen, the resonance. It's changing, becoming more coherent. Be careful who you listen to out there." I nodded, the weight of his words settling in my gut. The Shapers weren't just building, they were communicating. The world outside the airlock was terrifyingly beautiful. A landscape of impossible sculptures, glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. The ground crunched under my boots, a sound like walking on broken chandeliers. Towering spires of amethyst and quartz reached for the violet sky, and the air hummed with 1,000 different frequencies, a symphony of alien creation that my scanner translated into a dizzying dance of light and color on my wrist-mounted display. I moved through the petrified remains of a forest, the trees now perfect replicas in smoky quartz, their branches ending in razor-sharp points. This was the easy part. The true danger began as I descended into the Whispering Valley. The hum grew louder, more focused, a single, dominant chord that seemed to vibrate in my bones. My scanner began to flicker erratically. This was the chime. It wasn't just sound, it was a presence, a form of psychic pressure that sought out the cracks in your sanity and pried them open. I saw flickers in my peripheral vision, shadows that weren't there, movement in the unmoving crystal. Whispers slithered into my mind, formless and alluring, promises of release from pain, of reunion with the dead. I thought of my parents, consumed in the first wave of the vitrification, their bodies encased in a single, brutalist sculpture of amber. The whispers took their voices, calling my name from the shimmering walls of the canyon. I gritted my teeth, focusing on the rhythmic hiss of my rebreather, on the cold weight of the lead box in my pack, on the image of Lena's sleeping face. I followed the course of a frozen river, a solid ribbon of sapphire that snaked through the valley floor. It was here I found the first one, a Shaper construct, what we called a golem. It was humanoid in shape, roughly 9 feet tall, its body a mosaic of jagged, black obsidian. It stood motionless, its head tilted as if listening to a sound I couldn't hear. But the true horror was what was inside it. Suspended within its translucent chest cavity was a human torso, its face locked in a silent scream. Wires of crystalline energy, like glowing nerves, snaked from the golem's body into the human spine and skull. They didn't just kill us, they used us as processing units, our consciousnesses trapped as living batteries to animate their crystal soldiers. This one was fresh. The man's face was familiar, a scavenger from a neighboring settlement who'd gone missing weeks ago. I raised my rifle while my hand steady, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. I wasn't just killing a monster, I was granting a mercy. The kinetic round struck the golem's head with a deafening crack, shattering the obsidian into 1,000 pieces. The construct shuddered, its inner light flickering out, and then it collapsed into a pile of razor-sharp shards. The human torso slumped, finally still. I didn't linger. The act left a bitter taste in my mouth, a mix of pity and revulsion. that fueled my resolve. For 3 days, I pushed deeper into the valley, surviving on nutrient paste and recycled water. I navigated through labyrinthine crystal caves, their walls covered in glyphs that glowed and shifted. A language I was beginning to understand was not written, but sung. The chime was a constant companion, a nagging headache that threatened to split my skull. I learned to filter it, to focus on the dissonant frequencies, the signatures of constructs or unstable crystal formations. I moved like a ghost, a whisper in a world of alien song. My life depended on my ability to listen to the noise and find the silence within it. On the 4th day, I found the bunker. It wasn't buried. The Shapers had unearthed it, lifted it from the ground as if it were a common stone. The entire Aegis facility was encased in a colossal, pulsating geode, a crystalline tumor the size of a mountain. The original concrete and steel of the bunker were visible in places, warped and twisted, fused into the crystal structure like bone in amber. A single, perfect tunnel, impossibly smooth, bored directly into the main entrance, which was now a gaping maw of glowing, shifting crystal. The chime here was overwhelming, a choir of 1,000,000 voices singing a single, soul-crushing note. My scanner screamed a constant, high-pitched wail, its display a whiteout of pure resonance. Elias was right. This wasn't just a valley, it was a nexus. The Aegis facility wasn't just a ruin to be scavenged. It had become the heart of the Shapers' operation in this region, a cathedral to their crystalline god. The regulator I needed was in there, at the core of it all, and the whispers I'd heard in the valley were nothing compared to the deafening roar of the psychic storm that guarded this place. I stood at the edge of the tunnel, the wind whipping crystal dust around me, my rebreather hissing a lonely rhythm against the overwhelming hum. Getting the regulator was no longer a salvage mission. It was a pilgrimage into the belly of the beast. And I knew with chilling certainty that the beast was wide awake, and it had been waiting for me. Stepping into the tunnel was like diving into an ocean of sound. The chime washed over me, no longer a chorus, but a single, monolithic presence that scraped against the inside of my skull. My rebreather's hiss, my own heartbeat, the crunch of my boots, all were swallowed by the overwhelming resonance. The smooth, crystalline walls of the tunnel pulsed with a soft, violet light, and with every pulse, a new wave of psychic energy broke against my mind. The whispers came first, insidious and familiar. Kaelin, you're so cold. Let us warm you. My mother's voice, a perfect echo from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I saw her face in the shimmering facets of the crystal, not as she was in the end, a screaming figure frozen in amber, but as she was on my 10th birthday, smiling, a smudge of flour on her cheek. I squeezed my eyes shut, the vibro knife in my hand humming to life, its physical vibration a grounding anchor in the storm of memory. I pushed forward, one step at a time, each one an act of rebellion. The tunnel seemed to stretch on for an eternity, a psychological gauntlet designed to break me down before I even reached the prize. It showed me Lena, not in her stasis pod, but running through a field of green grass under a blue sky, a world I could barely remember. She turned to me, her face pale, the first crystalline veins of the blight just visible on her skin, and her voice, a heartbreaking whisper, said, "Why did you leave me?" The illusion was so powerful, so laced with my own guilt, that I stumbled, my hand reaching out, my glove scraped against the cold, unyielding crystal. It wasn't real. None of it was. I forced myself to focus on the scanner on my wrist. It was a chaotic mess of light. But through the white noise, I could see the tunnel's end, a pinprick of lower frequency darkness. I fixed on that point, my entire world shrinking to that single objective. I would not let them use my love against me. I would not let them turn my memories into weapons. I burst out of the tunnel and into the upper levels of the Aegis facility, gasping as if I had just broken the surface of water. The psychic pressure lessened slightly, fracturing from a single roar into 1,000 distinct hums. I was in what looked like a receiving bay. Massive blast doors now fused shut with veins of glowing crystal. The air was cold, sterile, and carried the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and faintly organic, like blood and batteries. The fusion of worlds was absolute. Emergency lights flickered within translucent crystal growths on the ceiling, their power siphoned and repurposed. Steel support beams were wrapped in what looked like crystalline muscle tissue that contracted and expanded in a slow, rhythmic pulse. Wires and conduits no longer ran along the walls, they burrowed through them, their rubber sheaths replaced by shimmering, faceted mineral. I had seen the Shapers work on the surface, but this was different. This wasn't just growth, it was integration. They weren't just destroying a human structure, they were digesting it, turning its bones and nerves into a part of their own alien anatomy. A flicker of movement to my left snapped me back to the present. It was fast. A skittering sound of glass on metal. My rifle was up in an instant. From behind a stack of crystallized supply crates, two creatures emerged. They were nothing like the slow, deliberate golems. These were smaller, about the size of a large dog, and moved with a twitchy, insect-like gait. Their bodies were formed from hundreds of razor-sharp crystal shards, held together by a shimmering field of resonant energy. They had no heads, no eyes, just a central, glowing core that pulsed with malevolent light. Splinters, the scavengers called them, though few who saw them ever returned to give a description. The first one lunged, a blur of cutting edges. I fired, not at the body, but at the glowing core. The ball bearing hit with a sharp crack, and the creature's energy field collapsed. It fell apart in a shower of inert, tinkling shards. The second was already on me. It leapt onto my chest, its crystalline legs digging into my gear, its sharp form pressing down with incredible weight. I could hear the microscopic fractures forming in the faceplate of my mask. I roared, slamming my back against a steel bulkhead. The splinter shrieked, a high-frequency sound that vibrated in my teeth, but it held on. I dropped my rifle, grabbed the vibro knife, and plunged it directly into its core. The blade screamed as it cut through the energized crystal. The splinter convulsed. A blinding flash of light erupted from its core, and then it was gone, leaving only a spiderweb of cracks on my chestplate and the smell of burnt air. I needed to find the reactor bay, and wandering aimlessly in this crystalline maze was a death sentence. The command center was my best bet. Its terminals should hold the facility's schematics. Following the faded emergency signage on the floor, I moved deeper into the bunker, my boots echoing in the humming silence. I passed through the barracks, a truly haunting sight. Rows of bunks were encased in delicate, web-like crystal, the soldiers within preserved like insects in amber. Some were caught in moments of panic, reaching for weapons that were now fused to their hands. Others looked as if they had simply fallen asleep, only to be consumed by the slow or silent tide of the vitrification. On one bunk, a data slate lay open, its screen a frozen image of a smiling woman and a small child. The crystal had grown over it, sealing the memory away forever. The chime was quieter here, more melancholic, a low thrum that seemed to sing a dirge for the lost. It was in the medical wing that I first noticed it. Amidst the pervasive hum of the facility, my scanner picked up a strange, repeating anomaly. It was a dissonant frequency, a tiny, rhythmic hiccup in the otherwise perfect symphony of the chime. A glitch. It was almost imperceptible, a ghost of a signal that appeared for a microsecond, then vanished, only to reappear moments later in the exact same pattern. It was structured, artificial, and, most importantly, it felt human. It was like a single desperate word, repeated over and over in a language the Shapers couldn't quite erase. I began to follow it. The signal grew stronger as I descended, leading me away from the command center and towards the facility's secure research labs. The glitch in the chime had an unexpected side effect. Whenever it pulsed, it created a momentary shadow in the resonant field of the bunker. For that split second, the Shaper's ambient awareness seemed to dip. I learned to time my movements to these pulses, stepping forward in the brief windows of psychic silence. I was no longer a discordant note in their song. I was a part of the static, hidden within the flaw in their system. The labs were a new level of horror. Here, the Shaper's purpose became chillingly clear. It wasn't just about growth or conquest. It was about study, dissection. Human bodies, or parts of them, were suspended in large, crystalline vats. Wires of light fed information from their still active brains into Shaper data storage crystals. Massive, intricate gems that pulsed with stolen knowledge. They weren't just taking our planet, they were plundering our minds, stealing our science, our art, our history, our very essence. And in the center of the largest lab, I found the source of the glitch. It was a man, or what was left of him. He floated in a massive containment cylinder, his body pale and atrophied. He wore the uniform of a high-ranking Aegis officer. Unlike the torsos in the golems, he was whole, but he wasn't a battery. His head was encased in a complex crystalline helmet, a crown of thorns that burrowed directly into his skull. And from that helmet, 1,000 threads of light connected to every system in the facility. He wasn't a prisoner in the machine. He was the machine. His mind had been hijacked and turned into the central processing unit for the entire Whispering Valley Nexus. He was the conductor of the chime. The rhythmic glitch was his own consciousness, a fragment of his humanity fighting back, sending out a looped, desperate SOS into the psychic ether. As I stared, my mind reeling from the discovery, the figure's eyes snapped open. They were pure white, glowing with an internal energy. The chime in the room instantly changed. It stopped being a passive, ambient field and focused on me with the intensity of a laser. The whispers returned. But it wasn't a chorus of my memories. It was a single, powerful, male voice that spoke not to my ears, but directly inside my head. Geophysicist, scavenger, brother. It sifted through my thoughts, my identity, my fears with terrifying speed and precision. You seek the regulator. You seek to save 304 souls. You seek to save Lena. My blood ran cold. It knew everything. I raised my rifle. But I knew it was a futile gesture. I wasn't facing a monster of crystalline rage. I was facing a god of information. Then, the voice shifted. The overwhelming, alien pressure receded, and for a second, the voice was different. It was strained, human, filled with a pain that was ageless. They are using me, using my mind to refine the signal, to coordinate the growth. It was him, the man in the cylinder, the glitch. You cannot take the regulator, the strained voice pleaded, cutting through the dominant, alien tone. The fission core it governs. Its energy shield is the only thing that dampens their connection to my mind. If you take it, they will have full control. I will be consumed. And the chime will not just whisper, it will command. Every human left on this planet will become a golem. I stood frozen, my mission, my entire purpose, shattered in a single moment. To save Bastion, I had to condemn this man to an eternity of torment and potentially unleash a fully realized Shaper consciousness upon the world. To save him, I had to let my sister, and everyone I knew, die. The lead-lined box in my pack suddenly felt impossibly heavy, the weight of 2 apocalypses resting in my hands. The alien voice returned, cold and final. Your choice is irrelevant. Your presence has been noted. The warden is coming. You have brought the lambs to the slaughter. Kalen, from the far end of the lab, a shadow detached itself from the wall. A golem, larger and more intricate than any I had ever seen. Its obsidian body inlaid with pulsing veins of crimson crystal took a heavy step forward. It wasn't just a soldier. It was an executioner. And in its chest cavity, where a screaming face should have been, there was only a swirling vortex of pure, resonant energy. It had no human component. It was all Shaper. And it was looking right at me. The warden's presence was a physical weight, a crushing gravity that buckled the steel floor plates beneath its feet. The crimson light from its core painted the lab in a bloody, pulsating glow, and the ambient chime of the facility warped around it, twisting into a discordant shriek of pure malice. This was not a golem. Golems were puppets, their strings pulled by the hijacked mind in the cylinder. This thing was different. It moved with a sense of purpose, of predatory intelligence. Its every step a deliberate, resonant beat in the symphony of my impending death. It didn't charge. It stalked, its crystalline limbs moving with an unnatural fluidity, each step causing the very structure of the room to groan in protest. The alien voice in my head, the voice of the hijacked conductor Diu, was gone, replaced by the warden's overwhelming psychic roar. It wasn't a voice of words, but of raw intent. Annihilate, erase, correct. It saw me not as a threat, but as a flaw, a glitch in its perfect, crystalline world that needed to be deleted. I fired my kinetic rifle, the ball bearing screaming across the lab. It struck the warden in the center of its chest, and instead of shattering, the obsidian surface rippled like liquid. The projectile was absorbed, its kinetic energy siphoned into the crimson vortex, which flared brighter for a moment. My weapon was useless. The creature was a resonance sink, a walking nullification field for physical force. It raised one of its arms, which flattened and elongated into a wickedly sharp, 2-pronged blade. It was toying with me, showing me the instrument of my demise. My mind raced, frantically searching for a plan, a weakness, anything. The man in the cylinder, the conductor, his eyes were still open, locked on me, the glitch. That rhythmic, desperate pulse of his humanity was still there, a frantic, almost imperceptible flicker against the warden's overwhelming psychic noise. The shield. His strained, human voice echoed faintly in my mind, a whisper beneath the storm. The fission core, its shield dampens them. The regulator, the very thing I came for, was the key, not to take, but to use. The warden lunged, faster than anything the large should move. I dove, rolling behind a row of crystalline vats. The blade sliced through the air where I'd been, the sound a low hum that made my teeth ache. The vat beside me exploded, showering me in viscous fluid and the shattered remains of a stolen human memory. I came up sputtering, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to get to the reactor bay. The warden was between me and the main corridor. There was no way through it, only around it. I looked up. A network of maintenance catwalks ran along the high ceiling, fused and twisted with crystal, but largely intact. It was a crazy risk. The structure could be unstable, and I'd be completely exposed. But it was the only path. The warden was already turning, its core pulsing with a low, guttural thrum of anticipation. It knew where I was going. I holstered my rifle, drew my vibro knife, and sprinted for a support column. The crystal growths gave me handholds, sharp and unforgiving, but they held. I scrambled up, my lungs burning, the warden's psychic roar pounding at my sanity. I reached the catwalk just as the warden's blade sliced through the column beneath me. The entire structure groaned, metal screaming as it twisted, but the crystal held it together. I didn't look back. I ran, my boots clanging on the metal grating, the sound a frantic, desperate counterpoint to the deep, rhythmic thrum of the facility. Below me, the warden moved with an eerie, silent grace, its crimson light tracking my every move. It didn't need to climb. It simply flowed, its crystalline form melting into the floor and reforming seconds later, cutting off my path. It was a living labyrinth, a predator that was also the maze. The reactor bay was at the lowest level of the facility. I navigated the upper levels like a rat in a cage, dashing through empty control rooms and across precarious, crystal-bridged chasms. The warden always one step behind me, hurting me, channeling me towards its chosen kill zone. The path it forced me on was no accident. It led me through the heart of their research, past rooms that displayed the full, unholy scope of their work. I saw a vivisected human nervous system, its every neuron mapped and integrated into a glowing crystal lattice. I saw a chamber where the very concept of gravity was being twisted, where shattered pieces of the room floated in a slow, silent dance around a central, resonant crystal. They weren't just colonizing, they were rewriting the laws of physics. They were reshaping reality itself. This knowledge was the warden's true weapon. It wasn't just trying to kill my body, it was trying to break my mind with the sheer, soul-crushing weight of their superiority. It was telling me, in no uncertain terms, that humanity was not just defeated, it was obsolete. I finally found a service elevator shaft, its doors pried open, the car itself a mangled wreck at the bottom. The emergency ladder, however, was intact. I started the long climb down. The darkness of the shaft a welcome, if temporary, reprieve from the pulsating light of the facility. But I wasn't safe. Halfway down, the entire shaft groaned. Looking up, I saw the warden's crimson light peering down at me. It wasn't climbing. It was collapsing the shaft. Metal shrieked and crystal shattered as the walls began to constrict. I didn't hesitate. I pushed off the ladder, using the vibro knife to carve a deep gouge in the elevator's guide rail, and slid. The friction sending a shower of sparks into the darkness. I hit the roof of the ruined elevator car hard, the impact rattling every bone in my body, just as the shaft above me imploded into a solid, impenetrable mass of crystal and steel. I was alive, but I was trapped. Or so the warden thought. The elevator had stopped just one level above the reactor bay. I cut my way through the floor of the car and dropped into a dark, humming corridor. I had made it. The entrance to the reactor bay was a massive, circular blast door, sealed not with locks, but with a thick, organic-looking membrane of crystal that pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. The fission core was on the other side. I could feel its power, a clean, contained hum that was utterly alien to the Shaper's chaotic resonance. This was human power, a caged star. The membrane was soft, almost fleshy. My vibro knife sank into it with a disgusting squelch, and the entire wall shuddered. As I cut a large enough opening, the air that washed over me was warm and dry, smelling of superheated metal and contained energy. And for the first time since entering the facility, the chime was muted, its overwhelming presence reduced to a distant, muffled hum. The conductor had been right. The core's containment shield was a sanctuary. I crawled through the opening and into a vast, cavernous chamber. In the center, suspended in a web of massive power conduits, was the fission core. It was a perfect sphere of polished, black metal, 20 feet in diameter, its surface crisscrossed with glowing blue lines of energy. It was a beautiful, terrible thing, a monument to a species that had mastered the atom but had failed to master itself. The regulator I needed was housed in a control console at the base of the sphere, a complex array of dials, switches, and a single, shielded cylinder. It was the heart of the machine, the one component that governed the core's stability. A shadow fell over me. I turned. The warden stood in the opening I had cut, its crimson light painting the chamber in hues of blood and fire. It had reformed itself, pouring through the cracks in the collapsed shaft like liquid shadow. It stepped into the bay, and as it crossed the threshold of the core's shield, it faltered for a single, glorious moment. The warden seemed to shrink, its resonant field flickering violently as the shield's clean energy interfered with its structure. The shriek in my mind intensified, no longer confident, but filled with a screeching, crystalline rage. This was a place it could be hurt. This was where I could fight back. It adapted quickly. The crimson vortex in its chest began to spin faster, pulling in ambient energy from the reactor itself, twisting the shield's defensive properties into a weapon. Arcs of blue energy leaped from the fission core, not towards the warden, but away from it, grounding themselves on the chamber walls. It was creating a dead zone around itself, a bubble of corrupted space where the shield was weakest. It was a stalemate. I couldn't get to the regulator without entering its bubble, and it couldn't maintain its integrity if it moved closer to the core. We stood there, 100 feet apart, a human and a monster, locked in a battle of wills at the heart of a dying world. Then, I heard him again. The conductor. His voice was clearer now, amplified by the core's energy. The conduits. Kalen. The primary coolant conduits. It is repurposing the core's energy, but it cannot stop the flow. I looked at the massive, thick cables that snaked from the core to the chamber walls. Coolant. If I could rupture one of those, the subsequent energy discharge might be enough to overwhelm the warden's corrupted bubble. It was an insane gamble. The feedback could destabilize the core, turning the entire facility, and half the valley with it, into a crater of molten glass. But it was the only card I had left to play. I looked from the warden to the regulator. I could still grab it. I could try to make a run for it, hope the lead box would protect it, and leave this place to its fate. I could save my sister, save Bastion, but I would be damning the conductor and unleashing the full force of a synchronized Shaper consciousness on the world. I thought of the frozen faces in the barracks, the data slate with the picture of the family, the dismembered minds in the research vats. I thought of the man in the cylinder, a hero whose name I didn't even know, fighting a war for his own soul in the dark. I made my choice. I dropped my pack, the lead-lined box clattering to the floor. I wasn't a scavenger anymore. I was a ghost. And it was time to show this monster what a haunting really looked like. I turned my back on the regulator and sprinted towards the nearest coolant conduit, my vibro knife held high. The warden knew my intent instantly. It roared, a silent, psychic scream of fury, and charged. My boots pounded against the grated floor, each step a thunderclap in the humming silence of the reactor bay. The warden moved to intercept, a blur of crimson and obsidian, its corrupted energy bubble warping the air around it. It was faster than me, stronger. A direct confrontation was suicide, but I wasn't running to fight it. I was running towards my weapon. The primary coolant conduit was as thick as my torso, its armored sheath radiating a palpable cold. This wasn't just a pipe, it was an artery, pumping supercooled helium directly into the fission core's magnetic containment field. Rupturing it wouldn't just cause a leak, it would trigger a catastrophic energy cascade. The warden was almost on me, its blade arm raised. There was no time to cut through the conduit's armor. I needed to find a weak point, a valve, a junction. My eyes scanned the length of the massive pipe and locked onto a maintenance terminal 20 feet up, where a smaller feeder line branched off from the main artery. A control valve. Perfect. I leaped, my fingers finding purchase on a thick power cable running parallel to the conduit. I hauled myself up, muscles screaming in protest, just as the warden's blade sliced through the air beneath my feet, close enough that I felt the hum of its passage vibrate through my bones. I scrambled onto the maintenance platform, the world a dizzying panorama of the glowing core, the furious monster below, and the complex array of machinery that kept this caged star from devouring itself. The valve was an old-fashioned, heavy-duty wheel, rusted and fused by time and neglect. My gloves slipped on its surface. I put my whole body into it. My feet braced against the terminal. Every ounce of my strength focused on this single point of resistance. The warden was already adapting. It couldn't reach me, so it changed its attack. Its obsidian form began to pulse, and the crimson vortex in its chest flared. It was drawing more power from the core, not to create a shield, but to project a focused beam of pure, resonant energy. The air around the platform began to shimmer, the temperature dropping so rapidly that frost formed on the railings. The metal groaned under the strain, microscopic crystalline fractures spreading across its surface. It was trying to shatter the platform out from under me. With a final, desperate heave, the valve broke free, turning with a shriek of tortured metal. A high-pressure jet of supercooled helium erupted from a release nozzle, a barely visible plume of gas that instantly flash-froze a section of the chamber wall. That wasn't enough. I needed to rupture the line itself. I took out my vibro knife, its blade humming to life, and stabbed it into the joint where the feeder line met the main conduit. The supercooled metal was brittle. The vibrating blade didn't cut, it shattered. A hairline crack formed, then spiderwebbed across the joint. With a deafening boom, the feeder line exploded. It was not a fire, but a release of pure, raw energy, a wave of incandescent blue light. The very essence of the core's power erupted from the ruptured conduit. The warden, caught in the direct path of the blast, was engulfed. It shrieked, a sound that was both psychic and physical, a tearing, grinding noise of crystal and energy at war. Its form flickered violently, its corrupted bubble collapsing as the pure, unadulterated power of the fission core washed over it. For a moment, I thought I had won, but the warden was not so easily destroyed. It was thrown back, its body slamming into the far wall of the chamber, but it was still intact. The crimson vortex in its chest was dimmed, almost extinguished, and cracks had formed all over its obsidian shell, leaking not blood, but raw, blue energy from the core. It was wounded, badly, but it was still alive. And it was furious. The explosion had a far more devastating effect on the reactor. Alarms blared to life, klaxons wailing a symphony of imminent doom. Red lights flashed across the chamber, casting everything in a hellish strobe. The fission core, its coolant system compromised, began to pulse erratically, its smooth, blue energy lines flickering and turning a volatile, angry orange. A computerized voice, calm and detached, echoed through the bay, warning magnetic containment field, failure imminent, reactor overload in T-5 minutes. I was standing on a time bomb. The warden pushed itself to its feet, its movements jerky and broken. It was regenerating. The blue cracks in its shell slowly sealing as it drew ambient energy from the failing core. In a few minutes, it would be back at full strength, and the entire facility would be a cloud of radioactive plasma. There was no escape. The shaft was collapsed, and the main entrance was a mile-long labyrinth of crystal and monsters. This chamber was my tomb, but I could still choose how I died. I looked at the regulator, still sitting on the control console, a beacon of hope that had become a symbol of an impossible choice. Then I looked at the fission core, the beautiful, terrible heart of this place. If the core went critical, its explosion would vaporize the entire facility, the warden, the conductor, everything. It would be a clean slate, a final, definitive no to the Shapers. But it would be a blind, senseless act of destruction. There is another way. The conductor's voice whispered in my mind, cutting through the blare of the alarms. It was weak, strained, but clear. The core, it can be focused, not an explosion. A purge. The schematic of the reactor flickered in my mind's eye. Not a blueprint I had studied, but an intuitive understanding fed directly into my consciousness by the man in the cylinder. He was showing me the reactor's final, desperate secret. The Aegis facility wasn't just a bunker, it was a weapon. The fission core was designed with a fail-safe, a way to vent its entire energy output in a single, focused, directional pulse through the facility's primary geothermal exhaust vent. It was a scorched earth protocol, designed to vaporize an invading army trying to capture the bunker. It would turn the entire Whispering Valley into a crucible of plasma, erasing every crystal, every golem, every trace of the Shaper's influence for miles. It would also, undoubtedly, kill him. The conductor. He was showing me how to kill him to save the world. "Why are you helping me?" I yelled over the alarms, my voice raw. "I was a soldier," he replied, his voice laced with an eternity of pain. "My name is General Marcus Thorn. I gave my life to defend this place once. I will do it again." Thorn, Elias's brother, he had been the commander of the Aegis facility, a ghost story, a legend who had vanished without a trace before the vitrification. Now I knew why. "The controls are at the base of the core," he urged, his voice fading as the reactor's instability grew. "You have to override the safety protocols. The warden will not let you. You have to give me an opening." The warden was almost fully regenerated, the last of the blue cracks sealing over. It took a step towards me, its crimson light returning to its full, malevolent intensity. It knew what I was planning. I looked at the control console. The override sequence required 2 people, a security measure to prevent a lone actor from unleashing hell. 2 handprint scanners on opposite sides of the console had to be activated simultaneously. A job for 2 people, or 1 person with 2 hands and a lot of luck. I had a plan. A terrible, insane, final plan. I sprinted towards the console, not away from the warden, but directly into its path. It lunged, expecting me to dodge. I didn't. I slid, my body hitting the slick, grated floor, and shot feet first under its legs. For a split second, I was directly beneath the monster, looking up into the swirling crimson vortex of its core. I jammed my vibro knife upwards, plunging it deep into the warden's body at the weakest point where its legs joined its torso. It wasn't a killing blow, but it was a wound. The warden roared, its psychic scream a physical force that made my vision swim. It twisted, trying to bring its blade arm down on me, but the awkward angle and the knife in its gut slowed it down. That was the opening Thorn needed. In that moment of distraction, he acted. The entire facility flickered. The lights died. The alarms cut out, and the humming of the core fell silent for a single, terrifying second. There was absolute silence and darkness. Thorn had diverted every remaining scrap of his consciousness, every erg of the facility's auxiliary power, into a single psychic blow. The warden froze, its physical form locked in place as Thorn's mind slammed into its own. It was a battle of gods in the silence, a war fought in a space outside of time. The lights flickered back on. The alarms screamed back to life. The core's pulsing was faster, more violent. The computerized voice announced, "T-minus 90 seconds." The warden was still frozen, but its form was vibrating, a low hum emanating from its body. Thorn couldn't hold it for long. I scrambled to the console, blood pouring from a dozen cuts. I slammed my left hand on the first scanner. A green light blinked. I stretched my body across the console, my fingers straining, my arms screaming as I reached for the second scanner. It was inches too far. The warden shuddered, one of its arms twitching. Thorn was losing. I wouldn't make it. Kalen, Lena's face, floating in the stasis pod. You have to save them. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't a hallucination. It was Thorn, using my own love as fuel, pushing one last image into my mind to give me strength. With a final guttural roar, I lunged, my fingers brushing against the second scanner just as my body gave out. The scanner flashed green. A new voice echoed through the chamber, calm and resolute. Purge sequence initiated. Geothermal vent alignment in progress. Detonation in T-minus 60 seconds. The warden broke free from Thorn's psychic grip with a final, victorious roar. But it was too late. The floor of the chamber began to retract. Massive steel plates pulling back to reveal a colossal circular shaft descending into the bowels of the earth. A deep, seismic hum vibrated up from the depths. The fission core began to glow, no longer orange, but a blinding, pure white. The warden turned to me, its body radiating a furious heat. It knew it was doomed, and it was going to take me with it. I pushed myself to my feet, grabbing the only thing I had left, the lead-lined box containing the inert regulator. It was heavy, solid. I had no illusions of killing it, but if I was going to die, I was going to die fighting. "Thank you, Kalen," Thorn's voice whispered. "A final, peaceful farewell. Tell my brother, I am sorry I was late." Then, his voice was gone, replaced by the rising crescendo of the dying star above me. The warden charged, and I raised the lead box, ready to meet the end. The 60 seconds I had left weren't a countdown to my death. They were a measure of my purpose. Time seemed to slow, to stretch, each wailing pulse of the alarm a distinct, deliberate beat in a funeral dirge. The warden, a monument of obsidian rage, charged across the bay, its feet barely seeming to touch the floor. Its psychic roar was a hurricane in my mind, stripping away everything but the raw, animal instinct to survive. But survival was no longer the goal. I hefted the lead-lined box, its weight a familiar, grounding presence. It was meant to protect a machine part. Now, it would be my final word. I didn't throw it at the warden's head or its chest. I waited until the last possible second, until its monstrous form filled my vision, and I hurled the box low, aiming for its legs. The warden, expecting a direct assault, was caught off guard. The heavy box slammed into its ankle with a sickening crunch of fracturing crystal. It didn't stop the creature, but it made it stumble, its fluid grace broken for a single, critical moment. It was all the time I needed. I didn't run for cover. I ran for the warden. As it righted itself, its blade arm swinging down in a devastating arc, I dove, not away, but into it. I wrapped my arms around its massive leg, a flea clinging to a titan. The blade sliced the air above me, carving a deep gouge in the control console I had just abandoned. The warden tried to shake me off, to crush me against the floor, but I held on with the last of my strength, my face pressed against its cold, vibrating surface. It had become a wrestling match at the end of the world, and my only goal was to delay, to hold this agent of oblivion here, in the heart of the fire that would consume us both. The computerized voice announced, "T-minus 10 seconds. The light from the fission core was no longer just bright, it was absolute, a whiteness that erased all color, all shadow. It didn't radiate heat, it radiated pure, silent power. The warden seemed to finally understand. It stopped trying to kill me, and instead strained towards the core, its powerful limbs churning, dragging me with it. It was trying to escape the blast radius, to somehow contain or absorb the purge. It would not succeed. I dug my fingers into the cracks of its crystalline hide, anchoring it, anchoring us both to our shared fate. For Lena, I thought, the image of her face, a final, perfect memory in the roaring white chaos. For all of them. 9. The alarms stopped. Their purpose served. 8. The hum of the core became a physical pressure, squeezing the air from my lungs. 7. The warden's psychic roar dissolved into a single, pure note of terror. 6. I closed my eyes. 5. The world began to dissolve into light. 4. I felt a sense of profound peace, a quiet that had been absent for a decade. The chime was gone. 3. General Thorne. Elias. My parents. They were all just names. Stories. All that mattered was this final silent moment of defiance. 2. I let go. 1. The world did not end in fire or fury. It ended in a single, perfect, cleansing silence, miles away, buried deep beneath the plains of Montana. Elias Thorne felt it. It wasn't a tremor in the earth, but a seismic shift in the soul. For 10 years, the chime had been a constant presence, a low-grade psychic migraine that hummed at the edge of every thought, every dream. It was the background radiation of their extinction, a constant reminder of their defeat. And then, in an instant, it was gone. The silence was so absolute, so profound. It was deafening. People stumbled in the corridors of Bastion, looking at each other with wide, disbelieving eyes. A woman dropped a tray in the mess hall, and the clatter was the loudest sound anyone had heard in a decade. A child, born after the vitrification, who had never known a moment of true quiet, began to weep, not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming novelty of peace. Elias ran to the geophysics lab, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The long-range resonance sensors, normally a chaotic scribble of shaper frequencies emanating from the Whispering Valley, were flatlining. A single colossal energy spike had registered moments before an event so powerful it had momentarily blinded their instruments, and then nothing. The valley, the nexus, the heart of the chime in their region had gone silent. He knew, with a certainty that was both triumphant and heartbreaking, what it meant. Kalen had not returned. But he had won. Weeks turned into a month. The silence held. The failing reactor in Bastion, however, did not care for victories. Its sputtering grew worse, the scheduled brownouts becoming longer, more frequent. The stasis pod in the medical bay, Lena's pod, was one of the first systems flagged for critical power failure. They had a choice: let the pod fail and the glass blight consume her in her sleep, or wake her up and face the consequences. Elias stood beside the pod, his hand resting on the frosted glass. Kalen had left a final log on his personal data slate, recorded just before he'd left for the valley. It was a simple message, a last will and testament. He described the failing regulator, the Aegis facility, and the impossible choice he knew he might have to make. He spoke of his sister, of his hope that she might one day see a blue sky, and, at the end, he delivered a message he had never been meant to carry. Elias. Kalen's voice crackled from the slate, weary and full of static. If you're hearing this, I met your brother. His name was Marcus. He was the commander of Aegis and the Shapers. They took him. They used him. But he never stopped fighting. His last words were for you. He said, "Tell my brother, I am sorry I was late." Elias closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his face. The ghost that had haunted him for 15 years was finally at rest. He owed it to both of them, to Kalen and to Marcus, to see this through. He looked at the technician. "Wake her up." The pod hissed, the cryogenic mist clearing. For a long moment, Lena lay still, and a collective breath was held. Then, her eyes fluttered open, They were not the eyes of a dying woman. The crystalline veins that had crept up her neck, the telltale sign of the blight's final stages, had faded. They were still there, but they were faint, like old scars, no longer glowing with that sickening inner light. The sickness wasn't gone, but its connection to the chime, the resonant energy that fueled its growth, had been severed. It was dormant. Kaylin's sacrifice had not just bought them time, it had bought her a cure. 2 months after the silence fell, the great airlock door of Bastion turned for the last time. It wasn't an exodus of celebration, but a solemn, determined procession. The reactor had finally died, and the 300 souls of humanity's last sanctuary were now refugees on their own planet. But they were not without hope. Elias Thorne led them, his face no longer a mask of grim resolve, but etched with a weary, cautious optimism. Lena walked beside him, weak but steady, her hand holding the old lead-lined box they had found in Kaylin's recovered pack at the edge of the valley, a box for a regulator that was never needed, now a reliquary for the man who had saved them. The world they emerged into was shattered, but it was quiet. The crystal forests still stood, but their inner light was gone. They were no longer growing, no longer singing their alien song. They were just glass, beautiful and terrible monuments to a war that had been won in the dark. In the sky above, the thin, violet membrane had begun to fray. Patches of a deep, forgotten blue were visible for the first time in a generation. The air was still thin, still dangerous, but it was their air now. They began their long walk towards the coast, towards a place where they could begin again. There were no statues for Kaylin. No songs were sung of his deeds. His name became a whisper, a story told to children of the ghost who walked into the heart of the storm and made it fall silent. His legacy was not in monuments of stone, but in every footprint they left on the path to a new future, in every breath taken without fear of the chime, and in the quiet, determined hope of a people who had been given a second chance. The age of ghosts was over. The time for builders had begun.